Once upon a time, there lived a man called Ebenezer Scrooge. He was a mean old man, tight-fisted, covetous, and as cold as the sharpest icicle. The ice within him froze his features, a pointy nose, shriveled cheeks, and a gait as stiff as a board. No one dared approach him, and he preferred it that way. He loved solitude. He hated company, and he hated cheer. Ebenezer's business partner, Marley, had died 6 years before. Together, they were Scrooge and Marley. Scrooge never changed the name on the door, and to this day it stood the same. And the office, well, Scrooge iced it in the dog days of summer, but did not bother to thaw it even on the most frigid days of winter. On this day, which happened to be Christmas Eve, old Scrooge sat in his freezing office of the counting house, which he owned. He kept his door open so that he might keep an eye on his clerk, who was at his desk, copying letters. Scrooge's fire was small, but the clerk's was even smaller. It was perhaps only one coal, not enough to heat much of anything. And there was no replenishing the fire, as Scrooge kept the coal locked up in his own office. So the clerk wrapped himself in a comforter and continued his work. Suddenly, a cheerful voice cried, "Merry Christmas, Uncle!" It was Scrooge's nephew. "Bah! Humbug!" Scrooge replied. "Surely you don't mean that, Uncle. Christmas, a humbug? It couldn't be so." "I do mean it. What reason have you to be merry? You are poor enough." "And you, Uncle, are dismal and morose, yet you are rich enough." "Bah! Humbug!" "Don't be cross, Uncle. I've come to ask you to dine with us tomorrow for Christmas dinner." "I most certainly will not." "I'm sad to see you this way, Uncle. I wish you a Merry Christmas." "Good afternoon." "Bah! Humbug." "And a Happy New Year." "Good afternoon," Scrooge yelled. His nephew stopped to wish the clerk a Merry Christmas, then went out the door. "That one, 15 shillings a week, a wife and family at home, and speaking about a Merry Christmas?" Night fell, and Scrooge readied for home. He said to the clerk, "You'll want the day tomorrow, I suppose." "If it isn't an inconvenience, sir." "It is just that. But I know that you'll be here early the day after." "I will, sir." Scrooge ate his dinner alone in his usual spot at a tavern before walking home. When he reached his front door, he put his key in the lock, and just as he was about to turn it, he looked at the door knocker and saw not its usual form, but Marley's face staring back at him. He stared for a long moment. Then he blinked. And sure enough, just as it had appeared, the face was gone, and the door knocker was once again itself. Scrooge went inside without another thought, although he was still a bit shaken, and he looked behind him to be sure no one was there before closing the door and bolting it. He checked the whole house before retiring to his room. He locked his bedroom door and made a small fire. It was bitter cold that night. He sat in his chair and warmed his hands and feet. And just then, a bell began to ring. A bell never used, long forgotten, but had been meant to communicate with the main floor of the house. And every bell in the house began to ring. Louder and louder. And then, after what seemed like minutes, the bell stopped. All at once. And then another sound. A sound as if someone were dragging heavy chains along the floor. And it got louder still. Closer and closer. Louder and louder. Scrooge sat frozen in terror. And then it came through the door. Marley's ghost. For it was that very same face that had appeared on the door knocker. "I don't believe it!" Scrooge cried. Marley dragged chains with cash boxes, ledgers, deeds, and heavy steel purses on the ends of them. "Who are you?"